So I thought I'd hop on and do a video about Genesis heat set paints versus air dry paints. And I'll tell you a little bit about why I chose to paint my babies with air dry paints, and to show you a couple babies from my collection that you guys both have seen quite a bit. Left on the left here is baby Indy, and she was painted by Emily's Dream Dolls. She was painted using Genesis heat set paints. And I realize I haven't even shown you guys her in this outfit. I do still play a lot with my collection off camera, so sometimes you guys won't see all the outfit changes, and all of a sudden you'll be like, hey, that baby's wearing a new outfit. So sorry about that. I did collect these babies for like 8 years before I started making YouTube videos, so playing with the babies on camera is actually a relatively new thing for me. But anyway, so Indy was painted with Genesis heat set paints, and Maddie here to the right, and Maddie was reborn by Melissa George. She was painted with air dry paints, and she was painted specifically with the Baby FX air dry paints. And so yeah, so in terms of as a collector, do I notice like any differences? A little bit. I would say that Genesis heat set paints are the ones that have been around the longest. I think the first reborns I collected, back, in 2008 or 2009, were painted with Genesis heat set paints. And I think a lot of times with regards to like the varnish, there's like a Genesis matte varnish that's used, and so it gives the baby a little bit of a, for lack of a better word to describe it, a little bit of a rougher texture, a bit more sandpapery, if that makes sense. Although it's interesting because with, as I'm feeling Indy, the bottom of her foot actually feels very smooth, and so it's interesting, compared to like the top of her foot. So I'm wondering if maybe Emily did something else with the bottom of her feet. I'm not sure, but yeah. And then Maddie, by contrast, she, air dry. Let me see. I'm feeling her. I'm wondering if Melissa might have also done. Sometimes a lot of air dry artists will do one bake in the oven for the final matte varnish, but you can see there's just in terms of the two babies. And some of it is just painting style too, but there's a little bit more of a kind of a translucent, glowy feel, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it, with Maddie. And I actually really do like it a lot. But I like both styles of painting, for, as a collector. So I don't personally really differentiate between the two. And there can be beautifully painted babies with both types of paints. It is. I have never tried Genesis paints myself in reborning my own babies, so I can't speak to how easy or how hard it is to use Genesis, but I will say that there is a much, much greater abundance of tutorials of babies made with the Genesis heat set paints versus air dry paints. I did a video reviewing the Reborn A to Z course, and that course is really designed for Genesis heat set paints, and she even links to Creative Impressions Nursery, who sells a beginner paint set that basically includes all the paints that she uses in her course, and that just makes it so easy for a beginner who's just starting out. So with regards to the Genesis heat set paints, the biggest difference that from what I've heard is between layers. These babies are painted with many, many, many layers of paint. Between layers, you need to bake. And you bake these babies in a, I think the most common oven is a New Wave oven that you can purchase. It is highly, highly discouraged, that you should not be baking these babies in your own oven that you use to make food. So that is highly and strongly discouraged, because if you can imagine baking the vinyl, there are fumes that come from that. You do not want to be eating that stuff. And I also, with the baking of the vinyl, it's also, I heard it's best to do it in a well-ventilated room, maybe do the baking outside. Sorry, that's my daughter. I'll have to wrap up this video pretty soon. yeah, so anyway, but it's really discouraged to not use to to make sure you're not baking in a place where you're kind of smelling the fumes. And so just with regards to the baking, I worry about like the health risks, of baking the vinyl and things like that. But there's a lot of kind of mixed thoughts on it. And Genesis is still by far the most popular paint that's used by reborn artists. It's a little bit more forgiving. So if you've painted a layer and then you realize you kind of go back and you're looking at it, you don't have to bake it until you're like 100% happy with it. So it gives you a little bit more working time. And if you are painting it and you decide, oh, I don't like how this is looking, and I could imagine that would be extremely helpful, especially when painting eyebrows, because eyebrows are tough to get right. You could just, kind of wipe everything off and repaint that layer. But with air dry paints, you have a window of time when you need to, kind of lock in, if you will, your work. So, it is recommended. I know Cher's air dry paints. I use Shea Air, Shea, CHE''AIR. I use her paints, and I'll show those to you guys in another video. I use her air dry paints, and it's recommended that you work in like 4-inch sections. So if you're seeing, something you don't like, quickly dab it off or sponge it off with a sponge. But you have to work pretty quickly with air dry paints. And you can use paint thinners, of course, and it does help slow down the air drying time a little bit, but you have to kind of work quickly and work accurately and just be a little bit more careful, because sometimes, boo-boos that can happen with your dolls, you kind of notice, wait, where did that spot come from? I thought, I had gotten everything when I went through it with my sponge. You just have to be a little bit more careful. But anyway, so those are just some of my thoughts on the two different types of paints. I think there's pros and cons to each. I think Genesis heat set paints are probably a little easier to use from what I've heard, and just a little bit more forgiving. However, the air dry paints, I think what's nice about that is, those who know what they're doing with regards to colors and mixing colors, you can actually buy artist grade acrylics at your local craft store, and that can be, less expensive in the long run than buying, the special paints that are, made for reborning. But I really like Cher's paints, and I think they are actually quite reasonably priced. And I'm working on, like baby number 6 right now, and one of the colors I use a lot, it's about halfway through, but these are small bottles that sell for a couple dollars each. So it's really, in my mind, not overly expensive, for the value that you get, and the paints do get diluted with thinner and with distilled water. So anyway, so that's kind of what I like about air dry paints. And the other thing I do like is, when you're working through the different layers, let's say you paint the head and then you do the legs and the arms, by the time you're done with the arms, a lot of times the head is dry, so you can kind of just keep working. You don't have to stop, whereas with baking between layers, you paint and then you have to wait and bake, and then you can paint the next layer and then you bake again. And, so there's that baking time, whereas the air dry paints more or less dry, in between parts as you're painting them. Anyway, for those of you guys who are not artists, this might have been a very boring video, but for those of you who are artists and are curious, and I had wanted to do this video as a response to one of the questions I got asked in one of my comments when I was talking about the Reborn A to Z course. So I hope this was informative. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, caveat, I'm not the expert on Genesis paints, and I have babies painted with both mediums, and I love them all. So I think that you can get beautiful results, if you're a talented artist and know what you're doing. All right. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.